Welcome to the Scale with Strive podcast, the place where you come to listen to some of the world's most influential leaders of the SaaS industry. I'm your host, Adam Richardson, and on today's episode, I'm excited to introduce you to Jannis Fett. Jannis is an investment manager at HV Capital, who are one of the longest standing venture capital firms in Europe with one of the biggest funds. They're known for investing in the likes of StoryBlok, Hadrian, Sennder, and on today's episode, I picked Jannis's brains on a whole host of topics, some things like the changes he's seen in the current market, what sectors are still booming and attracting lots of VC money, how you can scale your business through the different key funding milestones, and how best to write a business plan to attract investors. If you're a founder looking to better understand the investment world, this is going to be a great listen. Let's dive in. So Jannis, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us on the Scale with Strive podcast. Really looking forward to today's conversation. Obviously, we've met a few times now in San Francisco and Berlin, so we've had a lot of fun together over the last couple of years or so, but really looking forward to today's conversation and learning more about your story and your experience within the venture capital world. So I suppose for our listeners' benefits, it'd be great if you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and HV.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Adam. And surely very much I love looking back at our times in San Francisco and Berlin. So great to be also connected on this podcast, very, very digitally, I would say. So maybe let's start with myself. Actually, close by from Hamburg, a little small village called Gülzow. I don't expect any listener to know about that. Anyway, I left that village quite quickly after graduating high school to study at WHU, and have now been in Berlin for 5 years, actually. And I always like to say I'm a VC by training. So I straight up after uni joined Lakestar, where I spent 2.5 years. And now actually I've been 2.5 years with HV as well, where I'm currently an investment manager at, predominantly focusing on growth opportunities. Most of those in climate and B2B SaaS, but we try to stay quite agnostic to always, get a catch of the best opportunities out there and not just the ones that we set within our scope. Currently involved with 4 portfolio companies here at HV, Plan A, Coro, Agrina, and StoryBlok. So you can see 3 of them are pure software companies, which is kind of what I love the most. Going to HV, we're one of the oldest venture capital firms in Europe. I always tend to ask myself whether that's a good or bad thing. I actually like it. So we're also one of the biggest VC funds in Europe by now. Currently in our 9th fund generation, way more than 250 portfolio companies. And currently we, from this 9th fund generation, we can invest anything from 500K to 50 million across, any kind of startups and scale-ups across Europe. We do almost all verticals, from very consumer-focused apps or fashion companies all the way up to B2B enterprise software companies, but also even rocket ships sometimes. And this is, I'm literally meaning rocket ships with the case of Visa Aerospace. So I would say quite agnostic, quite broad, almost all stages that we would still call venture capital and not private equity yet.
Good stuff. Well, very interesting to know it goes from SaaS to rocket ships. Maybe we'll save the conversations about rocket ships for another time. I suppose it's quite a unique role that you do. You're enabling a lot of founders to realize their vision. But I'm always interested when speaking to investors how they originally got into venture capital. So, like you said, you're a VC by training. You did it straight out of university. Why is it that you got into venture capital in the first place?
Yeah. So if I think about it, I think it's by now 3 things. So first of all, it's a little bit by coincidence, because back then when I needed to do an internship for uni. My mentor back then, Christian Miele, he just started to work for VC. He needed an intern. He liked me. I liked him. We used to work together before. So he said, "Hey, why don't you join me as an intern for a summer?" So that was my very first internship experience at a VC. I think on the other side, it was almost also a logical next step. I had interned for 3 other startups, actually all of the HV portfolio, which is a pure coincidence, and figured it'd be nice to also see the other side of the table. Meaning the one on the financing side, while having worked at HelloFresh and Scalable Capital, for example. That was quite nice to see also how the other side of the table looks like. And thirdly, I think it's a little bit by character. When you get bored quite quickly, it's usually not the best idea to work at one startup in one function and do the day in day out job always on a very similar topic. But on the other side, on the VC side, it's totally different. By receiving multiple deals and kind of pitch decks a day, you always get to work on different topics and have to broaden your mind and look into new stuff. So I think for people who get bored quite quickly, the VC job is actually quite nice because you can always work on the most kind of tech frontiers that you want to. And I think once I was there, I just liked it so much that it's by now more than 5 years and counting.
Yeah. No, I resonate with a lot of that. I'm always liking to, have fresh challenges presented, and it can't sort of necessarily sit still for too long. So it's always good to be focusing on something. I suppose, yeah, it's good to understand, I suppose, why you got into it. I suppose what is it that you enjoy the most? Like, where do you get most of your like fulfillment, and what really gives you purpose with regards to working as a VC?
Yeah, so I think it's always very important to start things out and try a lot. For that, my first station within VC at Alexa was actually perfect because I was by then a very multi-stage fund, where I was able to help on 400 million consumer tech travel deals. On the other side, we did very tiny blockchain token investments, but we also did very straight up Series B B2B marketplaces or SaaS rounds. And at some point, I think you just start building up your natural focus and the stuff that excites you the most. And that happened to be on the one side growth investment and later stage stuff, but on the other side also climate tech a lot, and then specifically SaaS, right? So I think these were the things that you fall into love, or that I fell into love with. And then once you are in these, the network effects just get a lot stronger than if you would be super agnostic doing everything you want. It takes a while until you get a grasp of all the different things. But if you're into one specific thing, you get to know the right founders, you get to speak to the VCs who have a similar focus, you get to go to some specialized events, and your learning curve is just a lot steeper. I think one quote that always resonated with me was the one of my first internship, where Christian told me on the very first day, it's like, "Hey, Jannis, I think we're equally smart. The only difference for me is I've seen 10,000 pitches, and you have not seen a single one. So once you get to 10,000, we're probably at the same stage of being a VC." And I think this is kind of how it happens, that you start with something that you like, you fall into love with it, and then you get to experience the network effects of this, and then you stick with it. Having said that, being into all the SaaS craziness right now, I think 10 years ago was special to invest into it. By now, I think it's pretty much a commodity. Even though I think there's still very many startups out there who make it a little special, right? So I think what we see right now is a very cool trend is actually SaaS to optimize SaaS. That wasn't probably there 5 or 10 years ago. We see much more thinner applications and companies out there that are building something very specialized and unique, instead of, let's say, monolithic motherships of all-in software solutions like an Adobe, which are crazy by size, but you start segmenting them a lot, something like Jamstack, for example. And then I think on SaaS, there's a lot of stuff happening right now where it's really about the verticalized solutions, right? So I think those are 3 trends that are just fairly new, which I tend to spend a lot of time with. And then I think when it comes to the intersection of SaaS and climate tech, this is probably the space where I get most excited right now, because I think then it's combining 2 of the things I like the most right now in venture capital.
Yeah. And you mentioned about like segmentation within, particularly within SaaS, as a recruiter, we see, patterns and trends as the market fluctuates of particular domains that are doing really well in the current economic climate, some that aren't performing as well, particularly when we're dealing with sales reps. It's very indicative based on like performance from a salesperson to see how well the market's doing. I suppose, are there any trends that you're seeing at the minute, particular product verticals or areas that are booming within the software industry?
Yeah, I would say there are a couple of things that really tend to work right now, especially on the sales side. And if you look into recruiting these people as well, I think when I started out 5 years ago, most of the SaaS solutions were trying to sell you top line. They were there for more revenue, for greater reach. Specifically speaking about the Salesforce, HubSpots, and these kind of companies, right? They're all very much focused on creating top line impact. And something we see right now in SaaS, which is very much different, is that companies are starting to look at a different part of the P&L. meaning your costs and everything that you spend. So they're cutting out costs, if it's cloud costs or if it's efficiency within teams and so on, right? So I think this is when I said SaaS for SaaS. I think this is especially going into DevOps, where maybe 10, 20 years ago, an engineer was much cheaper. So focusing on enabling the salespeople and them creating more revenue was logical. And now the engineer might be the most expensive person within the organization. So making them more efficient, or enabling them to do more on a daily basis is for me a logical thing to happen. And I think this is something we're seeing right now, that it's more about creating efficiency and cutting costs within organizations. And I think what has to be added to this is that when we're talking about these kind of companies, it's more about not just creating an application or different layer within the organization, but it's really creating infrastructure and building infrastructure on that side that you're selling to your customers. And if I speak about infrastructure, I mean something that just simply cannot be replaced or cannot ripped out of your organization from today to tomorrow. Something that has tremendous value in terms of daily logins or daily usage of these kind of products, and not just something that is, let's say, I like to call a monthly, once in a month login product for a dashboard to show you something, but really more of getting actionable insights into it and actually cutting costs, and not just showing how that they could be cut one day.
Yeah, and you're definitely seeing that, particularly with like changes in pricing from cost per seat to now it's like you've got consumption models, particularly when you've got applications that are absolutely like fundamental to the business operations. So yeah, and I think tapping into what you just said there, my understanding of software has always been there's sort of three key pillars. There's risk, there's efficiency, and then there's revenue. And what you're saying there is that there's a lot of organizations and products being developed now that are focused on the efficiency layer. And I'd completely echo your point around DevOps, global shortage of good engineers in comparison to the demand for them. How can we make, get more out of less? So yeah, I've seen that myself with the amount of startups within that sort of DevOps and developer tool space. And I suppose, over the last 5 years since you entered the VC world professionally, there's been a lot of change, particularly, leading up to COVID with an absolute boom market. We've had COVID, which is, unprecedented times, the bounce back that everyone saw. And then, 2022 and 2023, where it's been a very different world for founders, for recruiters, sales leaders, and VCs. So it'd be good to get your steer on, I suppose, how you've observed the last few years within the VC world, particularly within SaaS, and what your views are for the future, really.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting question, because I think I've not only seen the market for 5 years, but also from very different responsibilities, starting out as an intern, now being an investment manager, but also from different VC funds. So in total, I have worked or seen at least 4 VC firms from the inside. And I think all in all, to start with the past 5 years, the first 3.5 years of my career were just, bigger, faster, quicker, higher, superlatives, right? Everything was just growing and being done quicker and more immense and so on. Deals were so crazy competitive that they would be preempted overnight by voicemails or emails. You usually had about 1 to 2 weeks of due diligence time until you had to come up with a decision, because others would just be quicker. Or you really saw a lot of winning combinations between funds where where they were just passing along deals for 2 to 3 years, always in the same. This fund did the C, then the A, then the B, and you could. It was just very tough to break these up, right? So you had all these different synergies and kind of made up combinations who would be passing along the deals. So that was interesting to see from the outside, and also to work in, because the deal pace was just so high that in certain years I would be working on such a high spend on venture capital, which was just great to see and learn. But it never really gotten the eye on the piece of how behind the substantial economics of a business. And I think this pretty much came into action in the last 1.5 years, where I like the sentence where a lot of people are calling it the milestone investing is back. And I think this is something that is certainly now happening, that from round to round.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that from round to round, from seed to A to B to C, you have to de-risk your business substantially and kind of show improvements in order to get to the next funding stage. While in other years, you could just raise money because it was a commodity and you could just get it from anywhere. So people wouldn't really check if you have actually gotten to the next milestone within your business. And you just had a lot of organizations that were just very fat and with a lot of people in there and just didn't have any efficiency, and you might not have hit the revenue targets, but the market was hot, so you just kept on growing. And I think now we're back really into this kind of milestone-based investing. So this certainly changes a lot of things. It changes the ICs. I think it changes all the multiples you invest in. It changes the due diligence you get to do. So you get to do 3 to 4 weeks instead of 1 to 2 weeks. And I think you're forcing the founders and also the industry to look more at the substantial drivers and the efficiencies and the businesses they're in, right? So there are more check marks to make than maybe 4 or 3 years ago. So I think that is something that I would like to, that I see back in the market now. And
I definitely say, from again as a recruiter dealing with founders or dealing with sales leaders, that there's been such an emphasis on hitting milestones. I'd say a lot of companies did significant rounds in 2021 with ridiculous valuations, and what we're seeing is a lot of vendors struggling to grow into that valuation in terms of hitting those key milestones from an ARR growth rate, for example. Which has then presented them with all of the challenges around managing runway and the sort of the amount of layoffs that you're seeing in the marketplace to enable them to actually hit those key milestones. So it's definitely something that I see from our customer base and from the market itself. But I suppose, on that, like, what kind of advice would you be giving to people around working towards those milestones to hit certain levels, to go for the next funding round? Like, is there advice that you'd be giving to founders with that?
Well, there's no, I think, one size fits all advice, but I think it's something that you should be figuring out with your existing venture capital firm in the very early stages, right? So I think if you're getting into bed with a VC fund in seed round, knowing you're going to raise X million of venture capital, I think you should be really aware and aligned with the VC firm in order to what you actually want to achieve towards a Series A round that will, happen or help this round to be happening, right? So I think, investing into Series A or B rounds or whatever rounds, knowing that follow-on capital is always guaranteed, is a much easier task than investing into these rounds, not knowing that this follow-on capital is achieved, right? So I think setting up these milestones, setting up the cash need in a detailed level that you actually believe in. I think, people always tend to say garbage in, garbage out at business plans in early stage. I think, yes, you can say that, but then on the other side, right, if you're raising a 5 million seed, you should really make sure that this will get you to the milestones needed in order to raise a Series A right now, with the current market environment, right? You never know if this funding will take you 2 to 3 years, where you will be at, if it's worse or better. But I think in general, you should be very much aligned on these certain things, that you know where this will take you and where you can get with it.
And so on that, with regards to like having a solid plan to get to that next milestone, is, as a VC, is that something that you would work closely with the founder and help them create that plan? Or are you expecting a founder to be coming to you with a clear plan that's been, vetted by, an FD or whoever they've got controlling the numbers and coming to you and driving that initiative? Or are you, reining them in a little bit and helping them, I suppose, put together that business plan before you then push on?
Yeah, I think, well, certainly, when we get to a deal or when we look into an opportunity, the data room has to be there and has to be in a good shape, and it has to be on a level that that people feel like that there is a lot of thought into it, and that it's legit, and that it's something to be actionable and to be executable by the founders. So I think this check mark has to be made when people start looking into the data room. At HV, we like to be this API where people can just come to us and send a pull request on whatever info they might need, in order to then see whether where within the network we have, or HV has, these kind of value adding factors to the startups.
Okay, all right, fair enough with that. It's good to know how working with an organization like yourself and an individual like yourself, like you mentioned, you've got that proven track record, that vast experience of working with organizations to help them, I suppose, formulate the plan. I suppose particularly over the last 12, 18 months, we've seen, a very sharp change in direction with regards to the market. The macro economic situations had a huge impact on the VC world and the SaaS industry as a whole. I suppose in terms of advice that you'd be giving to founders that are currently operating in this market now when it comes to raising more capital, what kind of advice would you be giving to founders looking to raise money right now?
I think the advice, and this is especially for SaaS, and since this is what we're focusing on here right now, like I said, try to position your product as something that is key infrastructure. Try to position your product in a way that you get daily usage on it, that it becomes substantial for the business to run on and to grow with. I think if you can show these KPIs, which do not necessarily have to be revenue, but also just kind of daily interactions and so on, then you're building something that will have long-term effects and long-term readiness. I think people are saying a lot 2x is the new 3x in terms of growth, and I think a 2x growth for a SaaS company that has a decent retention is very much into range for many companies, right? So I think the importance of retention has been greater than ever, showing that you can keep businesses for 5 to 7 years on your account, that they don't churn, that they actually extend their contracts and so on. So I think this is more important than ever.
So lifetime value is a big indicator for VCs looking at the lifetime value of their customers.
Yeah, I think it's becoming increasingly important, and especially the net dollar retention on that side is something that HV is focusing more and more on when it comes to due diligence. And maybe another point that is something that I like to advise companies on is starting out with partnerships earlier than usual. I think in times where burn multiples weren't so important, you could just hire a lot of people and just grow faster. I think now starting with partnerships more earlier than usual, you are potentially putting your firm into a position where you could create a business or a product that other people can make their living with without being on your payroll, right? So I think I like to see these companies adding up a huge network of partnerships, implementation agencies, other scale-ups out there and so on, where a person might say, hey, I love your product so much, I'm just now gonna digitize a whole German SME stand with it, and I'm not going to be on your payroll. I just take a 5% reseller fee or so on, right? So creating this kind of army and sales force out there that is not on your own payroll, I think is something that is huge. But historically, these partnerships need 18, 24, 36 months in order to ramp up. So I think looking into them a little earlier than usual is something that could be very beneficial to create. And I think there are great examples like a Celonis, I would say, who has done this in the very early days and has benefited very much from it in the long run. I think becoming a $10 billion business right now, and also within the HV portfolio, StoryBlok, they have, I think, 10 to 15 agencies right now out there only saying we're StoryBlok agency. So they don't necessarily have to do anything with their payroll, but they're really bringing new enterprise customers and helping this company to grow in a very capital efficient manner, and with resources that are not necessarily with you on a daily basis.
Yeah, you see that sort of channel and partnership led sales motion a lot, particularly within security. I can think of a lot of customers of ours that that's their full strategy, is going down the sort of channel and the partnership to help distribute their products. And a big part of that is around focusing on enabling them as well. I suppose from what you've seen, is there any advice for founders that you'd give around enabling partners and the channel to help boost the profile of your product and help sell the product for you?
Yeah, well, I think the most important piece of it is surely the product you have, right? So I think without creating a stellar product, this partnership is probably not going to be possible, because these agencies and companies and partner-led sales approaches, they will always have an incumbent or a benchmark that they used to implement or used to work with beforehand. So I think you need to be 10x better than anything else in order to start replacing them. I think it's a long-term effort. You start with one customer per year, then you go in 5, and then you might get to 10, and if you're very lucky, you get to 50 or whatever. But I think it's something that is a long-term relationship. So whenever there are conferences, whenever there are events, I think it's about inviting them, getting them on the dinner table, building up the relationship. Also, of course, creating a financially attractive profile, even though I would say most of the financial attractiveness for a partner comes through the actual implementation and selling the human hours, and not necessarily taking a cut of the ARR. So I think, this just has to be streamlined very nicely. And I think then it's about, running marketing on them, or actually with them, and maybe getting them access to some other things that they might not have access to, are things that will just really help building up these relationships, which is a very much a long-term effort, and which is also, I think, an effort that you need a dedicated team for, and not just something that can be done by the side from a founder.
Yeah. Okay. And I suppose, going back to like advice to founders in this market, you see a lot of early stage vendors now, trying to prolong the running of like being bootstrapped for as long as possible before they're necessarily going down the, raising a venture capital money. Or for those that are already in that space, looking for the next round. What advice would you be giving to founders when it comes to actually like choosing the partnership and choosing the VC firm to work with? Because it's not always just about the dollar, or the pounds, euros, whatever you're raising, but like what advice would you be giving to people in terms of selecting which firm to work with?
You're talking on the partnership side or on the VC side?
On the VC side. So, if I'm a founder, I'm looking to raise some money, like what advice would you be giving to me as a friend when it comes to selecting a VC?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's about, the alignment of interest. So can you decide on a way to go with this company, on where you want to steer it and where you want to head it? And is this the same idea that the venture capital firm will have about this? I think secondly, it's something like a marriage, but in a business context. And I think that, the general investment can hold from 8 to 12 years. So that might be longer than the average European marriage by now. I think, there's a lot of value into it when you and the founder, get together nicely. We can maybe also talk some banter where you're okay on talking on WhatsApp about it with him. And, it can be from a daily to weekly to a monthly interaction. But I think in any case, you should be sure that there's a fit, and that you would like to see his or her face in the boardroom, and not be like, damn, this guy or this girl again. I think this is quite important. And then I think, of course, there's a strategic fit, right? So in which country or which region can what VC firm bring really a lot of value? How much does their existing portfolio, how much could their existing portfolio add up on value to our new deal, or to the actual company, and so on, right? So I think then it comes a lot about the history of the VC firm, their strategic positioning within geos, and do they have a broader team that can help with their, not just with the network, but also internally.
Yeah, and I suppose, from my experience of working with you, Jannis, I think, what I've seen you flying halfway across the world to go and support your portfolio company at events. I've seen you hosting events yourself for your founders to get people together and sharing of experience and trying to, upskill and educate them. You're very opportunistic when it comes to even things like talent that could be a fit for your portfolio company. So it seems like not only do you have skin in the game, but you're also super committed and invested in the success of that business. I suppose from in terms of your philosophy and your attitude towards your portfolios, what is it that you do differently, and what value is it that you're always looking to bring to your founders?
Yeah, I think it's something like a I would say, or maybe even like a best friend or good buddy that you have. I think founders can be very selective in info sharing to the different VCs. And I think it's always easier to report the good news than the bad news. But I think, both have to be reported, and especially the bad ones are much more valuable than the good ones in most scenarios, because only if they're shared, there's a possibility to find a solution, not just by the founders, but also together. So I think that is something I would like to see more often. On the other side, I think for us it's also about being humble, and knowing that the hard work and the crazy efforts are being put in by the founder and not by the VC. I think they're running a business. They have the responsibility for multiple hundreds of people, and acknowledging their mental, their physical, and also their whole abilities, right? Putting these all together. I think it's quite important to stay humble and easy on the other side, as when saying, the board seat is just a control mechanism in that in that sense, and not really anything that creates even 1% as much as the value of the founder putting in the daily work. So I think this is something that we tend to like and operate from. So really putting the founders into the center of the stage, and let them be the superstars, creating all the value on the startup side.
Yeah, and obviously, like when it comes to the success of the organization, you're very invested in making sure like you make all of your portfolio companies as successful as possible. Dependent on the product can have a big part of that, but also like the people is a big part of and a big driving force behind the success of an organization. Setting the sort of founder aside, when it comes to like bringing great people in, one of the things I've observed as a recruiter, particularly, super technical founders maybe don't necessarily come with that, proven track record of hiring people. They may be very technically capable, very commercially aware, but when it comes to the hiring side, it can be a skill set that has to be learned. So from a hiring perspective and giving advice to founders, what advice do you typically give, particularly when hiring, going from that founder-led sales to, building out that go-to-market organization? How would you typically give advice when it comes to hiring?
Well, I think hiring go-to-market people in B2B SaaS is extremely difficult right now. I think, especially, for example, a good SaaS CMO is probably one of the toughest positions to be hired right now when we look across the need of the portfolio firms at HV. I think what I tend to say, or tend to like right now to see, is you don't necessarily always have to hire someone that has some pre-experience in the respective fields you're operating in. So I see a lot of very good performing salespeople who used to be former athletes or musicians, right? I think as long as the drive is right, they will work it out. I think it's similarly to tech departments, where a lot of engineers usually follow the very extrovert or very good CPO or CTO. I think the same accounts for sales organizations. If you have a great sales leader, it will be much easier to hire the AEs, SDRs, and BDRs below, because I think they can really create a movement and bring them all together. I think founders who have done sales before also tend to be better in hiring their successor, or in hiring their sales organization, and also understanding when these people don't perform as well as maybe expected. And lastly, I would say, right, don't be too scared about working with agencies or whatever around. I think in these times, if there's not the right fit or the person, hiring an SDR army out of from an agency, why not? Or hiring a paid B2B SaaS marketing expert, I think is also good stuff. But I think the obvious answer we're getting to is to work with Strive Sales in that sense.
Nice little cheeky plug there. Cool. Well, I think it's been good to talk about like advice that you'd be giving to founders, but I think in terms of like giving people something actionable to take away from this, with what is it that you look for in a founder? So we've talked about your due diligence. It seems like the market's allowed you to have a little bit more time when you come into it to investing. But in terms of the founder themselves, like what is it that you look for in a founder, when it comes to investing?
Well, I tend to say in growth investing, where I sit at HV, it's less important about the founder, or there's so many other things around the bone already that are just as important as a founder. But whenever I speak with the early team, it's for them it's really about finding this one founder that is a particular, I'd say, unfair advantage or cheat code to win a certain market. So someone who has just spent a lot of time with it, with a certain problem or within an industry, who has seen it firsthand, who might come from an agency where he experienced a problem and is now moving in towards building a SaaS solution in order to solve exactly this issue. I think this is usually what what is something that is they're looking for into the early stages. And I think if they have then built a solution that is 10x better than existing one in an insanely huge market, then you get to make the first 3 check marks. And then in growth, of course, it's about a founder creating product market fit and traction that HV has a feeling they can triple down on. Consequently, I think this is what makes it really chunky. So it's a combination of a lot of things, but at the end of the day, a founding team or founder that has an unfair advantage or a certain passion or knowledge about something that others don't have is usually a very big difference maker.
So the solid domain experience is a big thing.
Yeah.
What experience have you had, like bad experiences with founders, or let's say what bullets have you dodged when it comes to working with founders, challenging people where, I suppose, what's added to your experience over the years with that?
Well, I think in 5 years, you actually see a lot of stuff happening around there, right? So I think people who are not super honest to you, I'm only talking non-HV portfolio in this case, right? So I think there's honest representation of KPIs is not necessarily something you should see as given. I think there's also a lot of bad talk behind the scenes of people and founders, right? So especially in very competitive scenarios, there's obviously also a very tactical piece to it on fundraising. The magic formula of creating FOMO, I think nobody has figured that out yet. Certainly, if you have this magic formula, or if you have created FOMO, a lot of the negotiation power is on the side of the founders. And whether it's misuse of that or not really the 100% honesty you get to see, it can be a lot of things on that side when it's about that. But I think all in all, the industry is not defined by these kind of characteristics. I think it's actually the exact opposite. That I would say from 100 pitches and from 100 founder interactions, 99 of them you come out very positive and with a very good feeling, rather than something, okay, this is fishy, this is dodgy, right? So there's not a lot of wire cards out there, I'd say.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier in the conversation with your when you did your internship, sorry, his name's escaped me, but you mentioned about the difference. You're on a par when it comes to intelligence. The only difference being he's seen 10,000 pitch decks and you've not seen any at this point in your career. I suppose 5 years later, I imagine you've seen quite a lot. What is it that makes a really solid pitch?
Good question, and again, not a one size fits all question. I would say in a lot of growth investments where I was able to work on, after the first meeting, there was already a very good feeling that this could be a deal. And it's not necessarily that I could pinpoint this to one or two very, very specific answers, but the first sentence in a pitch for me is always, you choose how to present your company, because I think you're the one who can do it best. And I don't want to give you a certain framework or guideline. I think, of course, we're very much used to pitch decks that you need to go after with, right? So I think just letting the founder speak about what he thinks is really the coolest part of his business and the thing that makes him or her special and their company, apparently. I think this is the most interesting piece of it. And I think this conversation can only happen when the VC comes in pre-educated and when there has been a pre-read and also knows about the stuff that the company is doing, because then the obvious answer is out of the way, the overall understanding is there, and then you can just focus on the most exciting part. I think if a founder would say, I think the coolest part about our company is best described in performing a dance for you, I think that would take it one too far. But then on the other side, I think it's about getting creative, and sometimes it's a product demo. Sometimes it's a live sales pitch. Sometimes the founders send food to the office, which is great, and so on, right? So I think there are multiple ways on how to make this impression, and I would say don't always stick to the standard pitch deck, because like Christian Müller said back then, he saw 10,000 of those. So there's another way to make it special.
Yeah. So you mentioned also earlier about alignment when it comes to working with a VC. It'd be good to understand, I suppose, as an investor, what what your objectives are when you're investing into a company. What are your objectives? What are your goals?
Well, I think the North Star KPI is always the IPO, right? Or the North Star you're reaching for. And historically, HV has helped IPO multiple companies. So I think we have seen these precedents, and they're amazing to have, but they're also still the outliers, right? So I think the way on how we operate is that at some point there needs to be an exit mechanism. This is something that HV has takes into consideration when investing into a company, that there also has to be an exit channel to go after. So I think even private rounds can be amazing. I think in the past 2 years we have sold 2 stakes in private rounds, one of them being Depop, which was just as impactful for us as an IPO, right? So I think there are multiple ways to go. Consequently, either way is fine, if it's a private sale or an IPO or whatever. But there has to be a certain alignment or an idea on how this company can be exited one day. And if that is through secondaries and the further existence of that company, that is, I think, also totally fine.
Okay. And so we've talked about alignment, we've talked about pitch decks, we've talked about like things that you look for. In terms of like leading indicators of like a future superstar, a future unicorn, something that's really going to be impactful, disruptive within the market, and super successful, like what are the leading indicators that you typically look for?
Well, that's a good question. Let me say, insanely huge market, like insanely huge, 10x better solution than the existing ones out there. Unfair advantage when it comes to the founding team, or the operations they're undergoing, and then product market fit and traction, where you can just say, double down on it, triple down on it, go all in.
And how would you assess particularly the product market fits piece? So like, if you're doing early stage, sometimes they're still figuring that out. What would you do in that situation where it's really early stage? They've got a really good product. You can see that there's a demand for it, but they maybe haven't necessarily built the strong use cases yet to prove it. What do you do in that situation?
Well, I think in that situation, the founders have to get a little creative, because if there's no real product market fit that is shown in revenues and traction, it's tough to believe. And then I think the VC has to do the work via expert calls and speaking to existing customers and understanding them in detail. So I think usually you say that the dollars really speak the truth about the product market fit you have. But surely there are some markets, like, for example, the climate tech market, which is developing a little slower than others, and where it's not always about selling just selling an initial product and then being done with it, but more about selling a whole journey towards, let's say, a net zero business. So on these sides, I think it's about and also understanding the qualitative part of the customer relationship that the founders or the company has in this case, and not just a quantitative one.
Yeah. All right. What you've been investing now for 5 years. You've got a nice spread across different products. Talk to me about some of your most successful investments and why.
Well, I think that might be a little too early to tell, but certainly the investment with the biggest ROI has been my personal camper van. So that has created the greatest impact on my mental health, and so that was a good investment. On all the other ones,
where have you been? Where have you been?
Just across Europe. You don't get too far, but from Italy to France, to the very north, you can go to all places. So that's good. That broadens your mind. That helps a lot. But then taking that question back on the portfolio and the stuff you see, I mean, it's just sometimes the shitty part about venture capital world is just it takes a lot of time, and hence even being in there for 5 years now, it's still a little too early to tell. You tend to spend too much time with yourself on the deals you saw but might have passed, which are now huge companies. So that is a mental challenge you got to go after. But I think with the existing portfolio, certainly in a couple of years will be much easier to answer that question.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll be taking you up on a trip in the camper van at some point as well, Jannis. I spoke to Saeed a little bit before today's conversation, just to get a little bit of juicy gossip, but he didn't mention the camper van. So, I suppose in terms of like to start bringing things towards a bit of a close, with regards to like challenges that you've experienced and advice that you would give, like what has been some of the biggest challenges that you faced in your career, particularly working with like first time founders? What challenges do you see in that space?
Well, I might phrase it differently. I wouldn't say, what are challenges to work with first time founders, but rather, what is great about first time founders.
Yeah.
I think these founders tend to be a lot more coachable and hungrier to learn. I think that's great to see. I think they tend to try more things, make mistakes quicker, but also learn quicker from them, and also so understand what doesn't work. So there's a certain nativity to it that they go for, which can be very nice in some cases. Obviously, sometimes the experience is also nice, but I think this is something I like about first-time founders. And to some extent, they're also very dependent on their startup and the success. So having this also as a mechanism for them to put in the work and give it all is something that I think is very special to first-time founders.
Yeah, and in terms of, I suppose, a bit more of a broader question then. So, you've spent the last 5 years focused within your domain. You've met hundreds of founders. You've had hundreds of pitches. You've been in board meetings of all your portfolio companies. You've got a lot of experience, particularly at the stage of your career that you're at. One of the things I'd be interested to hear is what's the best piece of advice that you've been given? Who was it by, and why?
That's a good question. I'd say the most beneficial piece of advice I actually got during my hiring process at HV was Christoph Jung, one of the founding partners, because I also had the opportunity to join a couple startups on an operational role. But on the other side, I also had the opportunity to join HV, and I had worked with Lakestar for 2.5 years, and spent a lot of time in VC. But I always was quite sure that I wanted to go back and maybe do that again. But I also had the feeling, do I need to work operationally in order to understand founders better and to also see the other side again and work more on that? And Christoph back then told me, he said, "Hey, Jannis, I would advise you to never artificially engineer your CV, where you think by doing X will help you to do Y in the future." So I think that is one advice I always give to younger people out now in the organization, and the ones I'm speaking to, is artificially engineering your CV is probably not a good idea. Just do what you like, and then you'll probably be very good in it, and then it doesn't matter if you might have missed something in your career, because you can just certainly not cover it all.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think find something that you're passionate about, that gives you energy, and run with it. And I think, whatever that is, you'll make a success of it if it's something that you enjoy and gives you energy rather than takes away from it. So thanks for that. As I mentioned, I spoke to Saeed a little bit, did a bit of homework. He didn't mention the camper van. He talked a little bit about some of your hobbies, your kite surfing, tennis. I believe you're quite good at the football and stuff like that. So I think more on a personal level, Jannis, what is it you like to do on your days off?
Well, I think the perfect day off starts with a remote day before, because then you tend to groove into it nicer. So waking up at a kite spot and then going for a kite surf session is nice. Have a lunch and maybe read that Climate Change Got Reversed would be good. Go for another kite session. Get back and see that a HV company just IPO'd. Then maybe go for another kite session, or play some tennis, play some football, watch some tennis, watch Tour de France, go cycling. So anything on that side. And then certainly, I think the perfect day off always finishes with a barbecue of food plus beers and friends.
Nice. Well, listen, Jannis, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed the conversation today, learned a lot, and I think you've given some great advice to founders that will be listening to this conversation. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Adam. It was a pleasure.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you want more information about the podcast, head over to our website, Scale with Strive.